Today we're going to be working on session 5. We're moving away from the part-whole model and into the comparison model today. So because we're moving into a completely new addition and subtraction model, we're going to be going back to using our counters. So make sure you have your 2 color counters out, your template for the comparison tape diagram, and also make sure you have your dry erase board and marker. Okay, so we've changed our mission up a little bit because now we're working on comparison word problems, and we're going to be building a different tape diagram. It's going to look a little different than the part-whole model. And this is also that we can better comprehend those more difficult problems on our grade level. Remember that our numbers are small right now because we are not worried about our answer right now. We are worried about learning the model. So make sure that you are focusing all of that energy, that mental energy, on your model and understanding how it works. So we're going to start off by talking about the word compare, because the word compare in math means something very different than it does in your ELA class. In your ELA class, when we compare two things, we're talking about how they are similar. If you compared an apple and an orange, you might say that they are both fruit. That's a way that they are similar. Whereas if you were looking for a difference between an apple and an orange, you would be contrasting them. So in math, though, it's different. In math, when we compare numbers, we're looking to see the differences between the numbers. Think about the subtraction problems that you do. The answer to a subtraction problem is called the difference. And that's because when you are finding the difference between two numbers, you're comparing them and you're figuring out what one number has that the other number does not have. We're going to go into those numbers too in just a moment, but let's go back. Let's math compare Miss Purser with Miss Bruno. I know many of you know who Miss Bruno is. She works here on our campus as well. So I have a Bitmoji here of Miss Purser and a Bitmoji of Miss Bruno. And if we were going to math compare Miss Purser and Miss Bruno, we're going to be looking for the differences between us, not the ways that we are similar. So I'm going to read a couple of statements to you, and I want you to see if you can figure out what word would belong in the blank. Speaking about our height, you would say that Miss Purser is blank than Miss Bruno. I am taller. Okay, you would also say, what would you say about Miss Bruno about height? Miss Bruno is blank than Miss Purser. Go. Smaller, or shorter, I'm sorry, shorter. If you were talking about, let's see, our hair colors, Miss Purser's would be darker and Miss Bruno's would be lighter. Take a look at this. Taller, shorter, darker, lighter. These words are comparing words, and they all have something in common. It's those ER words. When we hear those ER words that compare, that lets me know in a math problem that I'm also doing some comparing. So they're not clue words or keywords, but they're just words in our English language that help us know that we are comparing two things. Our English language does that. If I said that this tastes better than that, I am comparing, and that word better is a clue to me that I am comparing. So those ER words in our language help us know we're comparing two things. There's another word or a group of words that helps us know that we are comparing. So let's look at our hair. Let's look at Miss Purser's hair versus Miss Bruno's hair, okay? If we were to look at my hair and see that mine is curly, right? My hair would have more curls than Miss Bruno's. It would have more. Miss Bruno's hair would have fewer curls or less curls than Miss Purser. So those are also words that help me know that I'm comparing something, more or less. And then that word fewer, we see that word fewer a lot. Okay, so we're going to be paying attention to those types of words in our word problem, because those words will help us know that we are comparing two things. And when we're comparing, we use a different model. I went ahead and took Miss Purser and Miss Bruno, and I put us in this weird little configuration. I'm going to actually go back and show you why I did that. So we've got Miss Purser. We're looking again at our differences. We've got Miss Purser, and here's Miss Bruno here. I'm going to use this box to represent just how tall Miss Bruno is. And I'm going to put her in this box. So if I look at Miss Purser, would I fit in that box? I wouldn't, because I am taller than Miss Bruno. But I can say that I have the same amount of height as Miss Bruno does, plus I have a little bit extra. So that right there, this second box here shows that extra amount of height that I have that Miss Bruno doesn't have. It shows the difference. This little extra spot here is the difference between our heights. That's what I have that she doesn't have. And you know how sometimes if you're out on the playground, you might be measuring your height and someone else's height, and we like to use our hands and we'll say, oh, look, you come up to here on me, but I'm this tall. So this extra space between my friend and my head shows that how much taller, or the difference between our heights. And look, we have this little symbol that kind of looks like our two hands coming and showing that extra space is the difference. And that's what this little symbol recognizes here, is that helps us to represent that this is our extra space that represents what this person has that this person does not. And we're going to be using that with numbers. So I'm actually going to take this little graphic of Miss Purser and Miss Bruno, and if I were to turn it on its side, that is a comparison model. We've got Miss Bruno's height. We've got that Miss Purser has that same amount of height plus a little extra. And then this shows that difference between our two heights. Okay, so we're going to look at that with numbers. What if I wanted to math compare the number 5 and the number 8? So the number 5 is obviously my smaller number, right? So it's going to go in my smaller box. Now the number 8 would be represented in this box down here. But we've got to go ahead and partition to show what does the number 8 have in common with the number 5. Well, they both have 5 in them, but then the 8 has something a little bit extra. It has an extra 3. So do you see how this whole box will add up to 8? In fact, if I look at this bottom box, it's kind of like a part whole. That 5 and 3 together will give me 8. But I can also see that this 3 isn't my difference between 8 and 5. What does the 8 have that the 5 doesn't have? Well, it has that 3 extra. It has a difference of 3. We're going to look at it in a word problem situation, but today you're going to only be using counters to represent your problems. You're not going to be using any numbers today, okay? But this is what I want you to notice. Take a look at our comparison model. We've got it right here, and it looks like a capital E. It doesn't look like this model that I just showed you. Well, it actually does. So what I've done is I've left open the boxes, but look, how do these boxes both start? They both start with a capital E. So sometimes this top number is going to be our larger number, so we might need a long box up top and then a shorter box at the bottom. And so because of that, I went ahead and left those boxes open. That way we can draw off the boxes to make them the length that we need. Sometimes too, we might be comparing 3 numbers, and then we'll have to add even another row of boxes to our capital E. Okay? So looking back, you've got your E in front of you and you've got your counters. We're going to start off by modeling with red counters, but we're going to be flipping them to yellow at some point too. Before we move on though, I want to read the problem with you all the way through, and let's see if we are hearing any comparing language. Remember, those comparing words are words like more than him, or less than him, or greater, or fewer, or longer, or shorter, those ER words. Okay. Paul sold magazines. Okay, got Paul's magazines. John sold more than Paul. Notice, I'm not talking about Paul anymore. I've moved on. I'm talking about John. And I know that John sold more than Paul. See how I'm taking what John sold and I'm comparing it back to what I was reading about Paul? Paul sold magazines, John sold more than Paul. That is comparing language right there. Remember we talked about if I said that I do more than someone or I have more than someone else, I am comparing what I have to what they have. So this is not a part-whole problem. It is a comparing problem. And then our big question is, how many did John sell? Notice that when I read this problem without the numbers, it really helps me to see who's going to have the bigger box and who's going to have the smaller box. Paul sold magazines. John sold more than Paul. So who's going to have the bigger, longer box? John will. Let's go ahead and model our problem though. We're going to take a look and it says Paul sold 4. Get your red counters and we're going to go ahead and show that Paul sold 4. Okay. And now that I know Paul sold 4, I can go ahead and block it off because I know that's all that is going to go in his box is those 4 magazines that he sold. So use your dry erase and we'll block it off. Now, here's what I want to show you though. This might feel a little weird at first. It says that John sold blank more than Paul. If I know John sold more than Paul, before I worry about all those extra ones that he sold, let's think about what we know he has in common with Paul. If Paul sold 4, then we know John also sold at least 4 because he sold even more. So before we even move on to that extra amount that he sold, let's go ahead and show that he sold at least 4 too. So we're going to go ahead and model with our red counters that John also sold 4. And notice how I'm even matching them up with my Paul counters to make sure that they each have like a face partner. It's just a good way to be organized. And I'm going to block off because I know that this amount is the amount that they both sold. They had that in common. But I also know that John sold extra. So watch this. Let's see how many extra or how many more magazines than Paul he sold. He sold 5 more or 5 extra. So we're going to make a separate box in John's row showing that he also sold 5 extra. And I'm doing that with yellow because that helps me to see the ones that John has that Paul does not have. Okay, so show that. And then we can box off that extra part of John's row. Okay, we got it. So take a look. What is our big question that we're trying to answer? We're trying to find out how many did John sell. So to find out how many John sold, we just have to see how many he had sold that was similar to Paul plus all of those extra ones, or how many more. So he sold 9 in total. What is the difference between how many John sold and how many Paul sold? What's the difference? And I can even draw my little difference bar to remind me that this is that extra space. He sold, and I'm just going to write it here, he sold 5 more. So the difference between how many John sold and how many Paul sold is 5. All right, we're going to try another one. You're going to notice the comparison model can move and change depending on the way the problem is worded. So our next comparison problem might look a little different. Let's read this one. Kara's book, before we read, make sure you're listening for comparing language, okay? And be listening to see whose box do you think is going to be the longer or larger box. Here we go. Kara's book weighs blank ounces. Mark's book weighs fewer ounces. How much does Mark's book weigh? Now we hear that word fewer, and we're talking about Mark's book. Fewer is a comparing word, and we notice Mark's book weighs fewer ounces than what? Than Kara's book. So we are comparing again here. We're comparing the weight of Kara's book with Mark's book. So notice I went ahead and I've already got my labels. I like to label based on the order that I read about the people or the objects or the items that I'm comparing. So since I read about Kara first, Kara gets my top box. I read about Mark second, Mark gets my second box. Now, who is going to end up with the longer boxes, the longer row of boxes or longer box? Mark's book weighs fewer. Fewer means less. So Mark is going to have the smaller box. Kara is going to have the larger box. So let's go ahead, now that we know that in our head, let's go ahead and model. Kara's book weighs 11 ounces. So this time we're going to need to get 11 red counters. And we're going to go ahead and model Kara's. You do the same. This one might take a little bit longer for you to model. Make sure that you're using just just red, no yellow yet. I've got my 11. And I'm going to go ahead, since I know that's what Kara has, I'm going to go ahead and close off her box. This one goes nice and far. Okay. Now we're ready to model Mark's, but I want you to watch me because this is going to look a little unusual to you. It says Mark's book weighs 6 fewer ounces. Stop. It does not say that Mark's book weighs 6 ounces, so I can just put those 6 in his box. It doesn't say it weighs 6 ounces. It says it weighs 6 fewer ounces. And guys, when I have an extra word between my number and what I'm counting, it completely changes the problem. It doesn't say 6 ounces. It says 6 fewer ounces or 6 less ounces. So because of that, I have to do this problem a little differently. What we're going to do is we're going to look back at Kara, what Kara's got right here, and we're going to flip over 6 of her red counters. We're going to keep them in her box because those still belong to her, but those are the fewer ones that Mark has. So we're going to go ahead and use our yellow, flip them over, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let me show you why we did that. Because in doing that, I can still see that Kara has 11, but I also can see that Mark has 6 fewer. So I have backed up 6 of them, and these red ones that are left, that must be the amount that Mark has that's the same as Kara. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to pull down those red counters to show that Mark has that same number of red as Kara. Because when we're comparing, we're always looking for what they have the same and what one has that is different. So we've got right here in this extra space. This helps me to see what Kara has that Mark doesn't have. Now I'm ready to answer my big question. How much does Mark's book weigh? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ounces. So Mark's book weighs 5 ounces. Now, what if I wanted to ask you this question? How much do their books weigh together, all together? What do you think you would do? You would put all of those counters together and count them up. Okay, so next week when we move into writing the numbers, I'm going to show you how that looks on the model. There's so many questions I can answer from looking at this model. I can answer how many extra does Kara have? How many fewer does Mark have? How many does Kara have? How many does Mark have? How many do they have all together? Okay, lots of questions can be answered from that model. All right, here's the next one. And I'm going to tell you this problem type or the language of this problem throws kids off all the time. And you're going to think, why? That looks easy. But it looks easy because I have the numbers covered up. when you're doing comparing problems, these are the best problems for covering up the numbers. The language can get very confusing. Cover up those numbers and it makes it so much simpler. Okay? So here we go. It says, Alex ran miles, which is more miles than John ran. Oh, do we hear comparing language? I hear that Alex ran more than John. I'm comparing what Alex ran to what John ran. So we have a comparing problem here. How many miles did John run? How many miles did they run all together? So we've got two questions in this problem. The first thing we're going to do is model, but we're thinking about who's going to have the bigger box. Alex ran blank, which is more than John ran. Alex is going to have the bigger box. So let's see. Alex ran 8 miles. Go ahead, guys, get those counters, the red counters ready, and get those 8 drawn. I wonder how many of you are beating me. Okay, I've got my 8. And then since I know now that's exactly how many Alex ran, I'm going to go ahead and block off his box. And I know he ran more than John. Let's see how many extra he ran. He ran 5 more than John. Alex ran 5 extra, or 5 more than John. Can you think about how I might show Alex's extra? Now, we don't need to add any more to his box. We already know that he ran 8 miles. So I don't need to put 5 more out there. He ran 8, and those 8, inside of those 8, 5 of them were extra miles that John didn't run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my reds and I'm going to flip over 5 of them to show the 5 extra, or the 5 more that he ran than John. And I think it's so cool how the answer for John just kind of pops up in front of you when you do that. Can anybody tell me how many I'm going to show for John? How many miles did John run? Well, he ran 1, 2, 3. And then I can box off John. And I can see right here this extra empty space between John and Alex. That's the difference between how much John ran and how much Alex ran. There is a difference of 5. Does everybody see that? How would I know how many miles they ran all together? I would need to put Alex's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with John's 3 and say all together they ran 11 miles. Notice that first part, that first problem that we answered was comparing. And in that second problem, we didn't compare anymore. Do you know what we were doing? If we're putting together what Alex ran and what John ran, that second question was actually a part-whole question. Do you notice that? We're just putting numbers together. All right, it is time for your exit ticket. So today's exit ticket is going to be done with your counters just like we did today. I even covered up your numbers for you so that you could practice modeling that problem and figuring out that comparing language first. So I'm not even going to show you yet. I want to read the problem to you and let you figure out if it's comparing and who's going to get the larger box before I show the numbers to you. So let's start the exit ticket together. Mary and Alice are selling lemonade. Mary sold blank cups. Alice sold blank fewer cups. Oh, there we go. Alice and Mary. Alice and Mary, we've got it right there. Alice sold fewer cups. And so we know that Alice's box will be shorter. How much lemonade did Alice sell? How much did they sell in all? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the numbers for you so that you can start your model. Teachers, if you'll circulate to make sure that their models are reflecting correctly the problem, and see if they can answer that second question with how much lemonade did they sell in all. Thank you guys so much for your attention, and great job on yet another session of the Mathletes Training Camp. Have a fantastic day.